Today I'm going to try to draw this table and chairs in Krakow, Poland, and I'm feeling much better today. If you saw yesterday's video, you'll know it was a little bit of an off day for me, but we talked our way through it and it got a little better. And today is actually much better, so hopefully that persists. The sun was shining for a while, I'm fed and watered and ready to draw, so let's get into it. Starting off, I'm back again with these exploratory lines, just trying to visualize the size of first this table in the middle and then the surrounding chairs. As you might have guessed, I chose this reference not because of the overwhelming mass of foliage that surrounds me, but for the table and chairs. I'll make sure to include some of the greenery along the way, but all I really care about here, just like the bicycle from a few days ago, is that one central focal point. So I'm making sure I can fit the table and all the chairs in the frame first, beginning with the top of the table. Once I have that, I can use that shape and visually measure it against the chairs. I can do so for height and width and depth. For example, the chair on the right, you'll see, is a little bit taller and slimmer and about the same distance away from me as the table. Compare that to the middle chair, and you'll see that its height at the top about matches that of the table, but is closer to me. So the legs will need to be much further down on the paper. This, of course, in real life is hard to visualize. You can see it pretty clearly in the reference video. But yeah, when you're sitting there, it's a lot more complicated than just measuring it out like that. But getting this top of the table certainly helps. So I'm trying to keep these little things in mind so I don't end up with, say, a tiny table and giant chairs or vice versa. It's surprisingly easy to home in on small things, and in doing so, draw them bigger than they really are. The composition of the drawing is so crucial, and that's something I'm constantly working on at this stage. In fact, last night I was watching a video by the channel Krakow, which if you're into our YouTube, you've surely heard about because it's gargantuan. But he was talking about the different stages of drawing and painting and how composition is one of the most important. He mentioned something about how people think that details make the difference in a good or bad drawing. I actually don't think he used the words good or bad. And in fact, just take everything I say from this point on as my own opinion. I'm not quoting anything. None of this is verbatim. But he spoke about how with poor composition, the other stuff doesn't really matter. And that's something I've really felt along this process. It seems to me that nailing the composition is a step that I need to take as much time as possible making, because it would be way too easy for me to think like, okay, I get it, and prematurely move on to the, in some sense, more fun stuff. Just like in any other artistic thing I've ever done, the basic structure is what holds up everything else. And without it, there's nothing for the nice light in the case of photography, the, I don't know, arpeggios in music, or the fine details in this case to cling to. It all falls flat without solid composition. And it's important for me to realize that while I can experiment with the quote unquote fun stuff, now is the time for me to build my good foundational habits, literally on the page and figuratively in my practice. So even though this feels a little bit like a slog today, I don't mean in the drawing, but like at this point in the process, I will be grateful I spent the time tomorrow, and not literally tomorrow. You get the point. Right. So as I'm sure you've noticed, today might be the first time I've had anything other than my legs to draw on. I'm set up in this little garden area behind a restaurant here in town, and I was lucky enough to find it empty and with two sets of tables and chairs, one for drawing, the other for sitting. Although I can't get used to this feeling of drawing on a table, but the stability sure was nice. As for the drawing, once I've sketched in one chair, I can keep its construction in mind. And rather than have to rebuild it from scratch each time to draw 3 chairs, I can focus on the angles and positions in the scene, applying that shape to the other chairs as I go. So the first chair requires all of my attention because, again, just like the bicycle, there might be some unexpected shapes or lines or what have you. I'm noticing that the top pieces of the chair curve down and in front of the back legs. Also, that there's a subtle downward turn at the bottom, and that the back legs are much simpler in design than the front ones. I can use this information going forward, leaving me free to focus on positioning more than these specifics. Now, we all know that a lot of that stuff is utterly meaningless for me right now because, like I just finished speaking about, those details don't make for a nice drawing. And even if I notice those small things, it doesn't mean I'm successfully drawing them. But it's still relevant going forward. This whole observational practice is, I think, imperative for me to build into my method now because it will mean that I've encouraged good habits within my drawing for when it eventually does matter later. Okay, so now that I have my focal point sketched in, I can have some fun with the environment. Like I said, everything else in the scene was secondary, but had I simply wanted to draw the table and chairs, I probably would have framed this whole thing differently. Making them more present on the paper would have made for a more interesting drawing if that's all I was doing. But even though the rest of this will have me seriously stretching my abilities, I'd still like to attempt to suggest this nice green garden in which the table and chairs sit. I do so by utilizing some techniques I've recently discovered for myself. And I think by the end of this one, I'll manage to, as I say, suggest the general atmosphere. So I'm doing things like drawing a few bunches of actual leaf silhouettes and attaching those to stems or branches. I'm implying larger canopies by including big, subtle plant shapes overhead. And I'm adding some small plants down below, like the potted plant on the left, to further expand the idea that this area is green and hopefully peaceful and lush. While this part of my drawing is noticeably vague and admittedly lacking to a large degree, it's a part that I've surprisingly enjoyed more and more in recent drawings. I spent some time last night copying some simple drawings of potted plants along with some chairs and facades, the type of stuff I've been drawn to. Pun most certainly intended there. And it's been pretty enjoyable for me. I will say, though, referencing drawings is a wholly disparate process. I'm sure the longer I do this, the more I'll have to say about it. But even just a few doodles had me questioning all of the other drawings I've done on this channel. You should have seen the shading, my God. And I think that's just because I don't have to solve the artistic equations in real time. Instead, I can piggyback off of those other artists' decisions and focus all of my attention on the technique. With that, and hopefully I didn't just lose my train of thought and all that, regardless of how transferable the process is as a whole, I think it will help me with the techniques, which will help me with applying them to my own drawing. Again, that doesn't speak to composition or even basic line work, with which I still have a big issue. But if I can help myself with shading by copying shading, maybe I can help myself with, let's stick with the theme and say composition, by copying composition. It's obviously not a one-to-one, but I think the more muscle memory I can build, the better. Speaking of shading, I've gone back to my focal point and boldened things up and just barely hinted at some subtle shadows. I'm a broken record at this point, and maybe I'm just saying it because I want it to be true, but I'm trying not to focus on shading right now, frankly, because of everything I've said in today's video. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. Is that smart? I don't know. Will that change in a day or two? You know, as time passes with all this, which is not happening on my watch, I just noticed. It's not running. Very cool. As time passes, I'm just open to accepting whatever happens on this journey. Today, I might say it'll be 2 years before I start painting, and tomorrow, who knows? I might go buy paint. So anyway, here we are, and I'm okay with this one. There's a lot of nuance that I'm sure someone could add here to make it look really nice, but I don't have it. So this is what we get. The objects are still slightly uncanny, just like the bicycle, but you know, to invoke that bicycle drawing yet again, it will be an iterative process. It's just one step at a time. And yeah, I'm excited to see that through. So let me know what you think of this one. Please subscribe to the channel, like it, send it to your friends, whatever else. And I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.